Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are picking up in journal collection number 25 of Ralph Waldo Emerson's journals, and we are up to Sunday, August 10th of 1834. Emerson is age 31. And with that said, I'll go ahead and get started. Sunday, August 10th. At Mr. Grafton's church this p.m., and heard the eloquent old man preach his Jewish sermon dry-eyed. Indeed, I felt as much worse spirit might feel among worshippers, as if the last link was severed that bound him to their traditions, and he ought to go out hence. Strange that such fatuity as Calvinism is now should be able to stand yet, mere shell as it is, in the face of day. At every close of a paragraph it almost seemed as if this devout old man looked intelligence and questioned the whole thing. What a revival if St. Paul should come and replace these threadbare rags with the inexhaustible resources of sound ethics. Yet they are so befooled as to call this sucked eggshell high-toned orthodoxy, and to talk of anything true as mere morality. Is it not time to present this matter of Christianity exactly as it is, to take away all false reverence from Jesus, and not mistake the stream for the source? It is no more according to Plato than according to me. God is in every man. God is in Jesus, but let us not magnify any of the vehicles as we magnify the infinite law itself. We have defrauded him of his claim of love on all noble hearts by our superstitious mouth honor. We love Socrates, but give Jesus the Unitarian association. See two sincere men conversing together. They deport themselves as if self-existent. Are they not for the time two gods? For every true man is as if he should say, I speak for the universe. I am here to maintain the truth against all comers. I am in this place to testify. August 11th. Is not man in our day described by the very attributes which once he gave his God? Is not the sea his minister, the clouds his chariot, the flame his wheels, and the winds his wings? August 13th. Blessed is the child. The unconscious is ever the act of God himself. Nobody can reflect upon his unconscious period, or any particular word or act in it, with regret or contempt. Bard or hero cannot look down upon the word or gesture of a child. It is as great as they. Little Albert Sampson asks when his father will come home, and insists that his father can't die. August 14th. We look up sometimes with surprise to see that the tree, the hill, the schoolhouse are still there, and have not vanished in our mood of Pyrrhonism. If there were many philosophers, the world would go to pieces presently, all sand, no lime. Quam parva sapientia. All society and government seems to be making believe, when we see such hollow boys with a grave countenance taking their places as legislators, presidents, and so forth. It could not be but that at intervals throughout society there are real men intermixed, whose natural basis is broad enough to sustain these paper men in common times, as the carpenter puts one iron bar in his banister to 5 or 6 wooden ones. Yet when at other times I consider the capacities of man, and see how near like they all are, and that they always seem to be on the verge of all that is great, and yet invisibly retained in inactivity and unacquaintance with our powers, it seems as if men were like the neuters of the hive, every one of which is capable of transformation into the queen bee, which is done with some one as soon as the sovereign is removed. The 4th chapter of my meditation is the observation that the soul, or the day, is a turning wheel which brings every one of its manifold faces for a brief season to the top. Now this dunghill quality of animal courage, indomitable pluck, seems to be the supreme virtue, anon patience, then elegance, then learning, then wit, then eloquence, then wealth, then piety, then beauty. Each seems in turn the one desirable quality, and thus every dog has his day. It occurred that the fine verses of honorable age, etc., and wisdom of Solomon is quite Greek in its genius, not Jewish. August 15th. Natural history by itself has no value. It is like a single sex, but marry it to human history, and it is poetry. Whole floras, all Linnaeus's and Buffon's volumes, contain not one line of poetry, but the meanest natural fact, the habit of a plant, the organs or work, or noise of an insect applied to the interpretation, or even associated to with a fact in human nature, is beauty, is poetry, is truth at once. Saturday Eve, August 16th. King Lear and Antony and Cleopatra still fill me with wonder. Every scene is as spirited as if writ by a fresh hand of the first class, and there is never straining. Sentiments of the highest elevations are as simply expressed as the stage directions. They praise Scott for taking kings and nobles off their stilts and giving them simple dignity, but Scott's grandees are all turgid compared with Shakespeare's. There is more true elevation of character in Prince Hal's sentence about the pleached doublet than in any king in the romances. Another mastership of Shakespeare is the immortality of the style. The speeches of passion are writ, for the most part, in a style as fresh now as when the play was published. The remarkable sentences of Lear, Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth might as naturally have been composed in 1834 as in 1600. Quote, I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription, etc. August 17th. Freedom. A very small part of a man's voluntary acts are such as agree perfectly with his conviction, and it is only at rare intervals that he is apprised of this incongruity. So difficult is it to read our own consciousness without mistakes. Whose act is this church-going? Whose this praying? The man might as well be gone, so he leave a Mazel machine in his place. Evening. On the wisdom of ignorance. Milton was too learned, though I hate to say it. It wrecked his originality. He was more indebted to the Hebrew than even to the Greek. Wordsworth is a more original poet than he. That seems the poet's garland. He speaks by that right that he has somewhat yet unsaid to say. Scott and Coleridge and such like are not poets, only professors of the art. Homer's is the only epic. He is original, yet he separates before the German telescopes into 2, 10, or 20 stars. Shakespeare, by singular similarity of fortune, undeniably an original and an unapproached bard, first of men, is yet unfolded in the same darkness as an individual writer. His best works are of doubted authenticity, and what was his, and what was his novelists', and what the players', seems yet disputed, a sharp illustration of that relentless disregard of the individual in regard for the race which runs through history. It is not an individual, but the general mind of man that speaks from time to time, quite careless and quite forgetful of that mouth or mouths it makes use of. Go to the bard or orator that has spoken, and ask him if what he said were his own. No, he got it he knows not where, but it is none of his. For example, Edward Emerson, whence had you those thunderous sentences in your master's oration? There is nothing in Wordsworth so vicious in sentiment as Milton's account of God's chariots, etc., standing harnessed for great days. We republicans cannot relish Watts's or Milton's royal imagery. Is it not true that contemplation belongs to us, and therefore outward worship, because our reason is at discord with our understanding? And that whenever we live rightly, thought will express itself in ordinary action so fully as to make a special action, that is, a religious form, impertinent? Is not Solomon's temple built because Solomon is not a temple, but a brothel and a change house? Is not the meeting house dedicated because men are not? Is not the church opened and filled on Sunday because the commandments are not kept by the worshippers on Monday? But when he who worships there speaks the truth, follows the truth, is the truth's, When he awakes by actual communion to the faith that God is in him, will he need any temple, any prayer? The very fact of worship declares that God is not at one with himself, that there are two gods. Now, does this sound like high treason and go to lay flat all religion? It does threaten our forms, but does not that very word form already sound hollow? It threatens our forms, but it does not touch injuriously religion. Would there be danger if there were real religion? If the doctrine that God is in man were faithfully taught and received, if I lived to speak the truth and enact it, if I pursued every generous sentiment as one enamored, if the majesty of goodness were reverenced, would not such a principle serve me by the way of police at least as well as a Connecticut Sunday? But the people. You hold up your pasteboard religion for the people who are unfit for a true. So you say. But presently there will arise a race of preachers who will take such a hold of the omnipotence of truth that they will blow the old falsehood to shreds with the breath of their mouth. There is no material show so splendid, no poem so musical as the great law of compensation in our moral nature. When an ardent mind once gets a glimpse of that perfect beauty, and sees how it envelops him and determines all his being, will he easily slide back to a periodic shouting about blood atoning? I apprehend that religious history of society is to show a pretty rapid abandonment of forms of worship, and the renovation and exaltation of preaching into a real anxious instruction. August 18th. The Mussulman is right, by virtue of the law of compensation, in supposing the scraps of paper he saves will be a carpet under his feet over the bridge of purgatory. He has learned the lesson of reverence to the name of Allah. August 19th. Never assume. Be genuine. So wrote I for my own guidance months and years ago, but how vainly. Show me in the world the sincere man, even the wit, the sentiment that seasons the dinner is as a sort of hypocrisy to hide the coarseness of appetite. The child is sincere, and the man when he is alone, if he be not a writer, but on the entrance of the second person, hypocrisy begins. What mischief is in this art of writing? An unlettered man considers a fact to learn what it means. The lettered man does not sooner see it than it occurs to him how it can be told, and this fact of looking at it as an artist blinds him to the better half of the fact. Unhappily, he is conscious of the misfortune, which rather makes it worse. As cultivated flowers turn their stamens to petals, so does he turn the practic part to idle show. He has a morbid growth of eyes. He sees with his feet. What an unlucky creature is Dr. Channing. Let him into a room. Would not all the company feel that, simple as he looked, the cat was not more vigilant, that he had the delirium tremens and its insolvency, that he heard what dropped from as any as he had read it in print? We sit down with intent to write truly, and end with making a book that contains no thought of ours, but merely the tune of the time. Here I am writing of a, and then there's a Greek letter with BK poem, free to say what I choose, and it looks to me now as if it would scarce express thought of mine, but be a sort of fata morgana, reflecting the images of Byron, Shakespeare, and the newspapers. We do what we can, and then make a theory to prove our performance the best. August 22nd. The greatest men have been the most thoughtful for the humblest. Socrates, of whom see the fine story told in Plutarch on tranquility. Alfred, Franklin, Jesus Christ, and all the Pauls and Fenelons he has made. It requires no ordinary elevation to go by the social distinctions and feel that interest in humanity itself which is implied in attentions to the obscure. Wordsworth is a philanthropist. Fox, Wilberforce, Howard, Montaigne, Washington introduced the ass into America, and so keep me heaven, I will love the race in general, if I cannot in particular. August 30th. Were it not a heroic adventure in me to insist on being a popular speaker and run full tilt against the fortune who with such a beautiful consistency shows evermore her back. Charles's naïve censure last night provoked me to show him a fact, apparently wholly new to him, that my entire success, such as it is composed wholly of particular failures, every public work of mine, of the least importance, having been, probably without exception, noted at the time as a failure. The only success, agreeably to common ideas, has been in the country, and there founded on the false notion that here was a Boston preacher. I will take Mrs. Barbauld's line for my motto, quote, "And the more falls I get, move faster on." I never was on a coach which went fast enough for me. It is extremely disagreeable, nay, a little fiendish, to laugh amid dreams. In bed I would keep my countenance, if you please. A poem is made up of thoughts, each of which filled the whole sky of the poet in its turn. Newton, September 13th. There are some things which we should do if we considered only our own capacity to safety, which we stick at doing when we think of the estimates of prejudices of other people. For the freest man society still holds a bribe. He wants of it a living, or a friend, or a wife, or a fit employment, or a reputation correspondent to his self-esteem. Is it not possible to draw in his importunate beggar hands and ask nothing but what he can himself satisfy? In some respects, certainly. In this matter of reputation, is it not possible to settle it in one's mind immovably that merit of the first class cannot, in the nature of things, be readily appreciated, that immortal deeds over which centuries are to pass as days are not brought to light, and wholly comprehended and decided upon in a few hours? The wise man is to settle it immovably in his mind, that he is only fit to decide on his best action, he is only fit to praise it. His verdict is praise enough, and as to society, quote, "Their hiss is thine applause." It is an ordinary enhancement of our admiration of noble thinking and acting that it was done in wilful defiance of present censure out of a clear foresight of the eternal praise of the just. Next, as to thoughts of the first class. Do not cease to utter them, and make them as pure of all dross as if thou wert to speak to sages and demigods, and be no whit ashamed if one, yea, not one in the assembly, should give sign of intelligence. Make it not worthy of the beggar to receive, but of the emperor to give. Is it not pleasant to you, unexpected wisdom, depth of sentiment in middle life, Iarnus and Abbess, that in the thick of the crowd are true kings, and gentlemen without the harness and the envy of the throne? Is it not conceivable that a man or a woman in coarse clothes may have unspeakable comfort in being the only human being privy to a virtuous action which he or she is in the act of consummating? Perhaps you cannot carry too far the doctrine of self-respect. The story that strikes me, the joke that makes me laugh often, the face that bewitches me, the flower, the picture, the building that, left to myself, I prefer, these I ought to remember, love and praise, for there is nothing casual or capricious in the impression they make, provided always that I act naturally. But they make this strong impression because I am fit for them and they are fit for me. But if I forsake my peculiar tastes, overawed by the popular voice, or deferring to Mr. Everett's or Mr. Wordsworth's or Baron Swedenborg's tastes, I am straightway dwarfed of my natural dimensions for want of fit of nourishment and fit exercise. It is as if you should fill the stomach of a horse with the food of a fish. Lean without fear on your own tastes. Is there danger in the doctrine as if it permitted self-indulgence? Fool! Every man hath his own conscience as well as his own genius, and if he is faithful to himself, he will yield that law implicit obedience. All these doctrines contained in the proposition, "Thou art sufficient unto thyself," are perfectly harmless, on the supposition that they are heard as well as spoken in faith. There is no danger in them to him who is really in earnest to know the truth, but like everything else may be a mere hypocrite's cloak to such as seek offense, or to such as talk for talk's sake. Sunday, September 14th. What is the doctrine of infallible guidance if one will abdicate choice, but striving to act unconsciously to resume the simplicity of childhood? It is to act on the last impression derived from a knowledge of all the facts, and not wilfully to secure a particular advantage. The single-minded actor insists on the tranquillity of his own mind. Ne te quisseveris extra. I would insist so far on my own tastes as to reading those books I fancy and postpone reading those which offer me no attraction. If Dr. Lindbergh would have me study Swedenborg because I have respect for his doctrines, I shall hold it sufficient answer of that aura of those books is not agreeable to my intellectual state. It is not for nothing that one word makes such impression and the other none. It is not without pre-established harmony, this sculpture in the memory. The eye was placed where that ray should fall, to the end that it might testify of that particular ray. I will not so far do violence to myself as to read them against my inclination, believing that those books which at any time I crave are the books fittest at that time for me. This is Carlyle's justification for giving such humorous prominence to such incidents as George Fox's leather suit of clothes. If I obey my passion instead of my reason, that is another affair. The appeal is always open from Philip drunk to Philip sober. September 15th. Heard Mr. Blagden preach yesterday with much interest. What an orator would some extraordinary discipline of events make of him! Could some Socrates win him to the love of true and the beautiful, or extreme sorrows arouse the mighty interior reactions, or revolutionary violence call into life the best ambition, could any event acquaint him with himself, he would, with his rare oratorical talents, absolutely command us. His manner is the best I know of, and seems to me unexceptionable. As to his preaching, that was good, too, in the main. The skeleton of his sermon, or as Charles called it, the frame of his kite, was fallacious, illogical, after the most ordinary fashion of the Wisners and Beechers, but his strong genius led him continually to penetrate this husk, and, leaning simply on himself, speak the truth out of this unnecessary mask. The conflict of the tradition and of his own genius is visible throughout. He gets his hands and eyes up in breeding Jehovah exalted as in Calvinistic state, and then saves the whole by ending with, quote, "in the heart's affections," end quote. I listen without impatience, because though the whole is literally false, it is really true, only he speaks parables which I translate as he goes, and thus he says, quote, "the carnal mind hates God continually," end quote, and I say, quote, "it is the instinct of the understanding to contradict the reason," end quote. One phrase translates the other. The charm of Italy is the charm of its names. I have seen as fine days from my window. Then what Boswellism is it to travel? Illustrate, eternalize your own Woodhouse. It is much cheaper and quite possible to any resolute thinker. What matters it, I said to myself on my journey, as the person in the coach disputed as to the name of the town, whether this bunch of barberry bushes and birches visible from the coach window be called Bridgewater or Taunton? So what matter whether this hill and yon green field be called Garofalo, Turney, or Ipswich and Cape Cod? Let the soul be fully awake, and its thought is so much that the place becomes nothing. Remember the Sunday morning in Naples when I said, "This moment is the truest vision, the best spectacle I have seen amid all the wonders, and this moment, this vision I might have had in my own closet at Boston." Hence learn that it is an unworthy superstition for seers to go to Italy or France and come home and describe houses and things. Let them see men and magnify the passages of common life. Let them be so manwise that they can see through the coat, the rank, the language, and sympathize promptly with that other self that under these thin disguises wholly corresponds to their own. You do not know Socrates, very likely. The philosopher whom you have admired in discourse makes a very different impression in private life. Very likely. Most men do. Their aims are not distinct enough. As his aim becomes more distinct, it will insensibly pervade and characterize his private action, his manners, his table talk. The whole matter of riches and poverty is reversed by the act of reflection whenever it begins. The intellect at once takes possession of another's wealth and habits and performances as if it were its own. Who is rich in the room where Socrates sits but he? Whilst Webster speaks to the Senate, who is formidable but he? The intellect, fairly excited, overleaps all bounds with equal ease, and is as easily master of millions as master of none. With each divine impulse it rends the thin rinds of the visible and finite and comes out into eternity, inspires and expires its air. It converses with truths that have always been spoken in the world, and becomes conscious of a closer sympathy with Phocion and Epictetus than with the persons in the house. Afternoon. No art can exceed the mellow beauty of one square rood of ground in the woods this afternoon. The noise of the locust, the bee, and the pine, the light, the insect forms, butterflies, cankerworms hanging, balloon spiders swinging, devil's needles cruising, chirping grasshoppers, the tints and forms of the leaves and trees. Not a flower, but its form seems a type, not a capsule, but is an elegant seed box. Then the myriad asters, polygolas, and goldenrods, and through the bush the far pines, and overhead the eternal sky. All the pleasing forms of art are imitations of these, and yet before the beauty of a right action, all this beauty is cold and unaffecting. Noble scene in I Promessi Sposi, the humiliation of Fra Cristoforo. That is what we aim to teach in all our Christian rhetoric about the transforming power of godliness. Young men, strike with particular observations, begin to make collections of related truths, and please themselves, as Burton did, with thinking the wheel and arc, of whose curve they discern, will, by their careful addition of arc to arc as they decry them, by and by come full circle, and be contained in the field of their vision. By and by they learn that the addition of particular facts brings them no more nearer to the completion of an infinite orbit. Shall I say that the use of natural science seems merely ancillary to moral? I would learn the law of the diffraction of a ray because when I understand it, it will illustrate, perhaps suggest, a new truth in ethics. September 16th. How despicable are the starts, sidelong glances, and looking backs of suspicious men. Go forward and look straight ahead, though you die for it. Abernathy says in his Hunter book that the eye sockets are so formed in the gods and heroes of Greek sculpture that it would be impossible for such eyes to squint and take furtive glances on this side and that. You have looked behind you at the passenger and caught his eye looking behind also. What dastards you both are for that moment! The unconscious forever, which turns the whole head, or nothing. September 17th. How truly has poetry represented the difficulty of reflection in the story of Proteus or Silenus, and in that of Odin's prophetess. Any evasion, any digression, anything but sitting down before the gates with the movable determination that they must open. One of the forms the Proteus takes is that of civil self-depreciation. You quite mistake, sir. I am not that you took me for a poor, evanescent topic really not worth your consideration. It was my resemblance to a relation that deceived you. Had you not better seek that? The poet writes for readers he thinks little of. Persons whom he could not bear, and who could not bear him, yet find passages in his works which are to them as their own thoughts. So Aunt Mary quotes the verses. Quote, "That which Sir William Pepperell willed came to pass." There is in some men as it were a pre-existent harmony established between them in the course of events, so that they will at the precise moment that which God does. They are pitched to the tune of the time, or shall I say they are like the fly in the coach. September 22nd. One is daunted by every one of a multitude of rules which we read in books of criticism, but when we speak or write unconsciously, we are carried through them all safely without offending or perceiving one. October 6th. In September the roads and woods were full of crickets, and as fast as one falls by the way, the rest eat him up. The high prize of eloquence may be mine, the joy of uttering what no other can utter, and what all must receive. I thought how much, not how little accomplishments in manners, speech, practice, address, an open eye discovers in each passenger. If an equal vitality is dealt out to each man, how strange if diverging by all that force from your line, your neighbor had not attained a degree of mastery in one sort admirable to you. Insist on yourself. Adhere to your own and produce it with the meek courage that intimates, this possession is my all, is my inheritance from Almighty God, and must have value. October 14th. Every involuntary repulsion that arises in your mind, give heed unto. It is the surface of essential truth. In Boston, at Second Church, George Sampson told me after I preached my sermon on habit that Mr. Washburn said to him that he wished he was in the habit of hearing such sermons as that, which speech I found to be good praise and good blame. New York, October 18th. Received the tidings of the death of my dear brother Edward on the first day of this month at St. John, Puerto Rico. So falls one pile more of hope for this life. I see I am bereaved of a part of myself. Quote, whatever fortunes wait my future life, the beautiful is vanished and returns not. End quote. October 27th. Quote, let them rave, thou art quiet in thy grave. End quote. Even so, how oft saith the Spirit that happier is the lot of the dead than of the living that are yet alive. Who that sees the spirit of the beast uppermost in the politics and the movements of the time, but only congratulates Washington that he is long already wrapped in his shroud, and forever safe, that he was laid sweet in his grave, the hope of humanity not yet subjugated in him. And Edward's fervid heart is also forever still, no more to suffer from the tumults of the natural world. And they who survive and love men have reason to apprehend that, short as their own time may be, they may yet outlive the honor, the religion, yea, the liberty of the country. Yet is, quote, hope the paramount duty which heaven lays for its own honor on man's suffering heart, end quote. Otherwise one would be oppressed with melancholy and pray to die whenever he heard of the orgies of the Julian Hall or of the outrages of a mob. The best sign which I can discover in the dark times is the increasing earnestness of the cry which swells from every quarter that a systematic moral education is needed. Channing, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Owen, de Gerardo, Spurzheim, Bentham, even Saul is among the prophets. The gentleman will by and by be found to mean the man of conscience. Carlyle, also Pestalozzi. Quote, where every man may take liberties, there is little liberty for any man. End quote. All around us in vulgar daylight are hid, yes, hid in daylight, sublimest laws. De Staël saw them. Ours have not yet been seen. Do not multiply your facts, but seek the meaning of those you have. This eternal superiority belongs to the contemplative man over his more forcible and more honored neighbor, styled the practical man, that the former moves in a real world, the latter in a phenomenal, that though the reasons of the former's activity may be rare and with intermissions of deepest gloom, yet when he works it is life, properly so called, whilst the latter's endless activity and boundless pretension reminds him too often of the laborer at the poorhouse, who worked all winter shoveling a ton of coal from the yard to the cellar, and then from the cellar to the yard. Euler's truth against all experience. It is losing time to inquire anxiously respecting the opinions of another speculator. The way his opinions have attained any value is by his forbearing to inquire and merely observing. Man is great not in his goals, but in his transition from state to state, great in act, but instantly dwarfed by self-indulgence. Not universal education, but the penny magazine has failed. Brougham may have failed, but Pestalozzi has not. Leibniz said, "I have faith that man may be reformed when I see how much education may be reformed." Why not a moral education as well as the discovery of America? The education of the mind consists of a continual substitution of facts for words, as in petrifaction a particle of stone replaces a particle of wood. But observe that what are called facts are commonly words as regards the fact man. It is rather humiliating to attend a public meeting such as this New York caucus last evening and see what words are best received and what a low animal hope and fear patriotism is. There is, however, great unity in the audience. What pleases the audience very much pleases every individual in it. What tires me tires all. Greatest care is taken instinctively on both sides to represent their own cause as the winning one. The word, "Why then do we despond?" was manifestly a mistake of Mr. Hones's speech. This party lie aims to secure the votes of that numerous class, whose vote Wade would kick the beam, of indifferent, effeminate, stupid persons who, in the absence of all internal strength, obey whatever seems the voice of their street, their ward, their town, or whatever domineering strength will be at the trouble of civilly dictating to them. But their votes count like real votes. Transcribe from Quarterly Review the sentences on the progressive influence of the man of genius. "If you kill them, I will write a hymn to their memory that shall sing itself," might Luther say. October 29th. Michelangelo Buonarroti, John Milton, Martin Luther, George Fox, Lafayette, Falkland Hampden, are not these names seeds, men akin unto the universe? The sentiment which, like Milton's, comes down to new generations is that which was no sham of half sentiment to Milton himself, but the utterance of his inmost self, "plainest taught and easiest learnt, what makes a nation happy and keeps it so." Thanks for my sins, my defects, as the stag should have thanked for his feet, as no man thoroughly understands a truth until he has first contended against it, so no man has a thorough acquaintance with the hindrances of the talents of men until he has suffered from the one and seen the triumphs of the other over his own want of the same. I should not be a bard of common life, wants, individualities in the pulpit, were I not the foolish parlor and table companion that I am. We always idealize. Hard to find did Paul, Luther, Adams, Lafayette, anything so fine as to bear out our praises. For said not Aristotle, "Action is less near to vital truth than description." We tinge them with the glories of that idea in whose light they are seen. We should hold to the usage until we are clear it is wrong. How different it is one man in 2 hours. Whilst he sits alone in his studies and opens not his mouth, he is God manifest in flesh. Put him in a parlor with unfit company, and he shall talk like a fool. October 31st. It is not to be doubted that the subjectivity, to use the Germanic phrase, of man's clothes itself with a certain objectivity in every age. Satan, who plays so prominent a part in the theology of the last age, is a hollow word now, but the evil principles which that word designated are no whit abated in virulence. I am bound by all my tastes to a reverence for Luther, yet can I by no means find any but a subjective, that is, essential correspondence in me to his mind. I cannot reanimate and appropriate his difficulties and speculations. Socrates, Bacon. How then Jesus and the apostles? Sometimes it seems nations, ages, were the body of shades of thought. Wrote mother of Edward what is true of all, that no words but his name can describe the peculiarities of any remarkable person. But what shall be the action of society? How superficial are our fears and hopes! We meet with a single individual, or read a single newspaper expressing malignant sentiments, and we despond for the Republic. By one declaimer of an opposite character, our confidence is renewed that all will go well. In these times a ragged coat looks sinister and revolutionary. Who injures one threatens all. Luther says, "Pull not by force any one person from the mass. Reflect on my conduct in the affair of the indulgences. I had the whole body of the Papists to oppose. I preached, I wrote, I pressed on men's consciences with the greatest earnestness the positive declarations of the Word of God, but I used not a particle of force or constraint. What has been the consequence? This same Word of God has, while I was asleep in my bed, given such a blow to papal despotism as not one of the German princes, not even the Emperor himself, could have done. It is not I, it is the divine Word that has done all. Sublimely it is said in natural history of fanaticism, of angry persons, night does not part the combatants. At least let the good side of these truths be applied to the true word which the poet has uttered whilst he is asleep in his bed, and when he is asleep in the grave it never halts or faints, but prospers in the work whereto it is sent. I believe in the existence of the material world as the expression of the spiritual or real, and so look with a quite comic and condescending interest upon the show of Broadway with the air of an old gentleman when he says, "Sir, I knew your father." Is it not forever the aim and endeavor of the real to embody itself in the phenomenal? Broadway is trade and vanity made flesh. Therein should the philosopher walk as the impersonations of states, as if Massachusetts, Carolina, Ohio should go out to take an airing. This is the end of Part 3 of Emerson's journal collection number 25 and Volume 3 of his collected journal works. In the following video, we will finish journal collection number 25 with Part 3. Thank you for listening.